Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Kinane. Coming up, the front bench shuffle. What will Kevin Rudd get? And what's happening with the deputy leadership of the Liberals? Why Jeff Kennett thinks we should bring back national service and making the right moves. The science behind what makes a good or bad dancer. Our panel tonight, Annabelle Crabb, ABC Online's chief political writer, Neil Lawrence from Lawrence Creative Strategy and the man behind the Kevin 07 campaign, and in Melbourne, Tim Wilson from the Institute of Public Affairs. Well, the mineral resource rents tax caused plenty of grief for the government in the lead up to the election, and it's back causing headaches today. Earlier today, Tony Windsor said he thought it would be on the table at next year's proposed tax summit. But the Treasurer wasn't so keen on that idea, pointing out it would be a source of more than half of the $10 billion regional assistance package promised to the independents.
The fact is that the MRRT is critical to funding our investments in superannuation, in regional infrastructure and lower corporate tax. So the independents will want to be informed about the final design of the tax, and we will be seeking their support for the final design of the tax and for the revenue stream that is provided for those fundamental investments in our economy.
And late today, Wayne Swan had warmed ever so slightly to the idea of the mining tax being discussed at that summit if it hadn't passed the Parliament by then. And while Tony Windsor appeared miffed with the Treasurer this morning, by this afternoon it was all sweet.
My understanding is that the concept that was in the Henry Review will still be looked at as well. The actual legislation that the government's got will be reviewed by the Parliament.
Have you talked to Wayne Swan since you made that announcement this morning?
Yeah.
So it's all sweet.
The government can take heart from Green leaders Bob Brown's comments about the mining tax today. He said he'd support it with some reservations.
I'm being pragmatic about it. I would like the original Henry tax review implementation, and we would, of that tax. And we would like to see the Rudd proposal go forward. But I did the first one, the 40%, but I did mathematics at Trunky Creek Public, and I can see that's not going to succeed. The proposal the government has put forward is the next best option.
Tim Wilson, with so much of the money flowing from the mining tax to the regions, is it a sure thing of going through?
No, I don't think it is. You've got the current Senate still in play unless it goes through after next July, when it has a much greater prospect. The government's being very sneaky in attaching its sweeteners to the independents to the mining tax revenues. But it's really no surprise. Every step of the way, the government has deliberately tied something one group wants to getting a mining tax passed. But whether it's going to work or not and whether they're going to get it through the House of Representatives, I think still we have to wait and see on that one.
Annabelle, you think it's going to cause a few more headaches for the government yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, this idea of a regional royalties for the region scheme is something that's been kicking around in the Nationals, and I think Tony Windsor has backed this sort of regional tax structure. By sort of the back door, they've kind of got it, haven't they? I mean, that the mining tax proceeds will go to subsidising just over half of the package that the government sort of parted with to get these regional independents over the line. There's a certain poetry in that. But look, I mean, I love this kind of shuffle that we've been doing today where Tony Windsor says, you know, I raise you a summit, and Wayne Swan says, but I've got a regional consultation process. You know, maybe they'll compromise on a select committee of some kind. You know, this is, I suspect, something we're going to see quite a bit of over the next couple of years. Don't you get that sense?
I do. Neil, I know you've had a bit of experience with the mining industry, having worked on their advertising campaign. Do you think they might see a bit of window of opportunity here to put some more pressure back on the government?
Look, I doubt that the players on either side, the major serious players, really want to reopen this and revisit it in the short term. This is Julia Gillard's open the curtains and let the sunshine in Parliament. And I think the industry has an agreement, has a process in place that they've committed to, and I suspect both sides will really just want that to happen.
Tim, that does give a good incentive, though, for the independents to get it through if Wayne Swan does tie it to regional development.
Well, it does, but really what they should be arguing for is for it to be put into the tax summit proposals to be thrown in. I mean, if we're going to properly debate tax reform, you'd actually expect that, you know, one of the largest tax increases on one particular sector of the economy might actually be discussed as part of a raft of tax discussions. But I disagree with Neil that both sides of politics won't want to open this can up. I would have thought the Liberals would want it opened up as quickly as possible. This government's on a knife edge and barely has any legitimacy. Surely they would want the mining industry hammering the government from day one, saying this, you know, new Rainbow Green Labor pseudo-independence coalition doesn't care about regional Australia and particularly Queensland and WA to shore up their base there.
Yeah, Tim, well, I said both sides, actually, the government and the mining industry, not both sides of politics. I suspect you may be right about what the Liberals want to do.
Tim, it'll be very interesting to see what the Greens will be arguing at the tax summit. I mean, if you look at their website, they've got an interesting range of opinions on tax policy. They want to increase company tax, they want to increase the top marginal tax rate, and they'd like to see a Tobin tax on currency transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Greens have a raft of new tax policies, least of which, of course, is also a carbon price signal or a carbon tax. And these are going to come to the fore. And during a tax summit, they're going to be exposed for the sort of scrutiny, exposed to the sort of scrutiny that it didn't get during the election campaign. And I imagine the Greens aren't going to come off very well from it. But equally, Labor probably isn't going to support many of them as well. They may rely on the Greens for political support, but in reality, Labor's going to minimise introducing new taxes which increase the cost of living as much as possible.
And just to throw something else into this tax mix, Annabelle, Business Today is saying they'd like GST on the table and its base. And
while we're talking about that, while we're opening the doors up and letting a little sunshine in, how about dragging a few of these other little buggers out of the cupboard? I mean, you know, there is an oddness about the Henry Tax Review because, I mean, as you'll remember, it was kind of initiated at the 2020 summit. Sorry, wrong decade. 2020 summit, where you remember that there was that scene where Kevin Rudd came in and sat down on the ground while the economists were discussing the need for tax reform. I called it the "suffer the little economists to come unto me" moment. And he got kind of carried away a little bit by the glory of root and branch tax reform, and Lord knows we're all subject to that impulse occasionally. And so, yay, a new review was born, but of course then it had retrospectively to be retrofitted with some certain restrictions, like it wouldn't look at reviewing, it wouldn't overturn the current parameters around the GST, it wouldn't look at the capital gains tax on the family home and so on. So, you know, that'll be the test of the metal, won't it? How new paradigm do we want to get? Do we want to throw everything on the table?
Well, there was no rest for Julia Gillard today. She has to choose new finance and defence ministers, as well as deciding what job she's going to give to Kevin Rudd. Annabelle, what are we likely to see Kevin Rudd doing in about a week and a half's time?
Well, paying close attention, I'd say.
Yep.
Well, I think that Julia Gillard is going to have to honour her undertaking to Kevin Rudd.
Because she doesn't want him quitting.
No, that's right. Nobody wants a Griffith by-election. Nobody wants any kind of by-election. I think they'll be running a quick check on Kevin's heart valve transplant, making sure that's still okay, and there'll be health checks for everyone in the years ahead. But look, seriously, I think that Foreign Affairs is a good chance. Someone suggested to me the other day that perhaps they should give him trade and then sort of point him in the direction of the Doha round and get him to sort that out. It seems like a diabolical enough problem for Kevin Rudd to spend some time on sorting out. But
and it'd be a dangerous area if Bob Catt has been in his ear recently too, wouldn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, the extent of the friendship between these two blokes has become quite clear in recent days. I mean, they could just make him Minister for Qatar, because that would be just about
Trade and Foreign Affairs sounds like a plan to keep Kevin overseas 300 days a year.
Yeah, a super portfolio.
Neil, where do you think he should end up?
Look, Foreign Affairs is the natural place, and I'm sure it's what he would most want if you look at his career. I have a soft spot for him doing Indigenous affairs. Not to say Jenny Macklin hasn't done a fantastic job there, but Rudd had a particular feeling for that, and with his apology to the stolen generation, there's still a lot of unfinished business there to be done, and I think that's something he could take on and do brilliantly. So probably won't happen, but I'd personally like to see that.
Tim, what kind of challenges do you think Julia Gillard's going to face now sorting out this ministry?
Well, I think it's very difficult. Obviously, she has to fill the finance spot, and I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. But certainly I think Chris Bowen's going to get a promotion, and of course we're going to see the entry of Bill Shorten. But I have to say, I agree with Neil Lawrence. I mean, the argument is that Kevin Rudd would be a good Foreign Affairs Minister. I disagree. All the evidence, I think, suggests that he's basically not been very good at foreign affairs when he's indulged as Prime Minister. And as somebody with a background in trade policy, I'd want him as far away from trade as possible. I think Indigenous affairs is a really good area for him to see whether he's prepared to back up his rhetoric and his arguments and his emotions that he showed over Indigenous affairs with real action. I think he'd be much better there than a foreign affairs portfolio. But I imagine Gillard wants to get him out of the picture as much as possible.
Of course, one of the intriguing things at the moment is what to do with Rob Oakeshott and whether he may take on a ministry. Neil, what do you think of this, given that Rob Oakeshott said at that press conference yesterday he was not endorsing a philosophy or brand or campaign by siding with Labor. But if he took a ministry on, would he be in fact siding with a campaign and a brand?
Well, it's very hard to be an independent in government, certainly in cabinet. It's sort of an oxymoron. And we don't know which way he's going to jump. Although I suspect that if he had made the decision that he was going to stay independent, he would have said that yesterday. That was his point as we all waited and listened of absolute maximum leverage. Had the whole nation waiting for him to drop the word. And that was the point I think he would have said, and I have decided to stay independent. This is my guess, and you're either right or wrong on this. I think he was demurring a bit, and I suspect that he will actually head towards taking up a position.
Annabelle, what do you think?
I think there are precedents for independents functioning inside cabinets. I mean,
and members of other parties as well.
Yeah, I mean the National Party MP Carleen Maywald served in the Rann government's cabinet as water minister, I think she was, for some years, and that all went perfectly well until she lost her seat. So, look, there are, of course, complications for independents because you lose your outsider status the moment you become an insider. I mean, one of the other options, of course, is, and Julia Gillard wasn't especially clear about this yesterday, and Oakeshott himself said, oh, well, yes, there has been an offer made, but it has